So today I'm going to talk to you about Project 2 and what you're going to do to create that project. So for Project 2, you're going to be creating a movie poster. And for the movie poster, you're going to want to be thinking about a number of things, both design-wise and in terms of semiotics, which you've been reading about in the Visible Signs book that you've been reading. We're going to go through some slides and talk about movie posters and what some of the attributes of movie posters are, and then we'll talk specifically about what is required in order to create this project. As you look at these images of movie posters, I would like you to be thinking about these three questions. So what genre is the film a part of? What visual indicators signify that to you? And then it gives a few examples like color scheme, typeface, body position, facial expression are some of the visual indicators that you can look for. And then what effects are used to create the visual interest in this poster? So here's the first one. And again, you can follow along with the slideshow. This is posted in the class documents O2 project folder, and it's the only PowerPoint in that folder. So you can just go ahead and open that and follow along with the slides on your own. So you can get a better view of them than just this here, but this is so for reference so you know which one we're talking about. So for this first poster, what genre do you think that it's a part of? Can you decide which one you think it is? So it's probably fairly obvious that it's an action movie, but let's talk about some of the reasons that it's an action movie, okay? So one thing in particular is that she's holding a weapon. Typically in action movies, people are holding some kind of weapon, be it a gun or in this case a sword. And so that signifies to the audience that there's going to be violence in this movie, and if that's something that you like, then you should go see it, right? One of the things I want to talk about in terms of genre is the purpose of it, right? So we should mention that real quick. What the visual indicators are trying to accomplish in these movie posters is it's trying to appeal to the audience that's going to like the film, right? So you want to communicate effectively what your film is about so that you can attract the type of audience that is going to appreciate it, right? So that is the purpose of having your poster attached to a particular genre, is so that you can attract the audience that you want. And that's important for all kinds of posters, not just movie posters. So let's talk about then the specific visual attributes of this poster that are signifying to us that it's an action movie. I mentioned the sword already. The other thing is her body position. It's a very domineering body position. She's clearly signifying to the viewer that she is in charge through her very upright stance. She's staring directly at the viewer. And so that clearly communicates that she is in charge of this situation because of her body positioning. The other thing that's happening is the color scheme. Okay, so it's using reds and oranges primarily that are very bright. Red is oftentimes associated with violence because it's the color of blood. So that is something that can happen in an action movie, is it's using more of those warmer colors in order to communicate that. In this poster specifically, it's actually flames, which additionally shows a type of action, right? And then the other things that we want to talk about too, because this is a design class, we want to think about the typeface that they're using. So in this case, it's a very bold font with not a lot of extra serifs on it, for example. It's a sans serif font, and it's very bold, and it's very clear to read. There's a different font that's used up here where it says The Bride, probably recollecting back to whatever The Bride is in this particular instance. So it's trying to refer to something else, so it's using a different typeface. So those are the different visual attributes that are signifying to us that it's an action film. The other thing that we want to talk about is specifically what kind of visual effects are being used in this poster to create just a visual interest, not necessarily something that's always used in an action film, but something that is just creating some visual interest in the poster. And what they're doing here, so they have an image of Uma Thurman And then there is a layer with flame on it, and then there's a text layer behind it. So they're creating this sort of textured looking version of the title of the film that you can't quite read because she's standing in front of the two middle letters in each of the words. So it's again repeated here so that you can actually read the title because you want to know which movie to go to, right? But they did also want to create some visual interest using some of the typeface, and they did that through layering. A more advanced feature in Photoshop that you could potentially use or play around with, which I don't talk about in the videos, but if you want to Google it, a lot of times when you think, oh, I wonder if I could do this, if you try Googling like Photoshop, blah, 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 you'll be able to figure out some different new techniques that you can do beyond what I present in the video. And this might be one of them. So this is using blending modes. So if you wanted to just Google blending mode, use Photoshop, you could figure out how to do something like this. And what that does is it just makes the flame sort of integrate with the image in an interesting way. But you can also do this by increasing the opacity, which I do talk about in the videos. So those are some of the visual effects. There's also a reflection of her down here at the bottom of the poster. And then there's a date on it. So if you wanted to put a date on yours, I've had students do that as well. It just makes it more feel like a movie poster as opposed to just a poster. All right, so let's go to some other ones. So this one is similar, right? It's still communicating action. We can tell that because there's a gun in it. The gun is actually pointed straight at the viewer, which then is a little bit, maybe raises your blood pressure a little bit. It's a little bit more exciting and maybe a little bit more scary. So that's happening in this particular poster, and the gun is in focus and his face is not in focus. So it's blurry in the background. So the gun is the most important thing in this because of the focus that is put on it through the image. The other thing is the color schemes. This is more of a cooler color scheme. And I would say that is because this movie poster is trying to convey a more psychological thriller type of film. I actually haven't seen this film, but that's what I'm guessing the movie is about, based on the visuals that are being presented here. The other thing that is happening, so they have the title of the movie here, and then there's a little glitch in the font so that it doesn't quite line up. Which when you put in things like that, that also alludes to sort of a mental glitching or something to that effect. So it feels a little bit more uneasy, right? And so this poster is trying to make you feel uneasy. It's communicating to you that the film is going to make you feel uneasy, and then you decide if you want to feel that way and go see the film, right? So this one also has a date at the bottom of it. It also uses this thing called steel tongs, which I'll talk about in the video, which is basically this stuff that you usually see on a movie poster that communicates to you who the producer was and all of that information. There's actually a font that will do that in a really nice way. So if your poster seems like it needs a little something to push it more into the direction of this is a movie, that can really clearly communicate that that is a movie poster if you use that typeface and then just kind of make up producers and main actors or whatever else information is normally people don't read it, right? Have you ever read this on a movie poster? No, it's just like a visual that that kind of takes up some space and communicates something. Maybe you have read it a few times, but I would say the majority of people when they look at this poster don't read it. And so that harkens back to hierarchy, right? So that's going to be something, we talked about that with the book project as well. What's the most important thing? Well, we already said the gun's probably the first thing. The John Wick title of it would be the second. And then you probably see Keanu Reeves and the date third. And then maybe this tagline here. And I've had students do some really interesting things with creating taglines for their movie posters. Because I'll talk more about this at the end, but you are essentially making up a movie. You're not using an existing film, you're creating a movie in your imagination, and then creating a poster for it based on what genre you imagine that film to exist in, once you've created the title and everything for it. So anyways, I've had students create some pretty interesting taglines here. So this says, "Don't set him off," right? Makes you feel uneasy again, right? It's going for this whole effect of making you feel uneasy so that you know that that's what the movie is going to be about. Okay. So I'm not going to talk about these all in depth as much as I just did, but I will call attention to a few different aspects. But I would like you, if you could, go through this PowerPoint and kind of find the one that appeals to you the most, and then try to answer that series of questions about the poster to see if you can decode that movie poster. Okay, so we have a few movies that are based off of comics, and the movie posters themselves are very comic oriented. They feel a little more surreal. It doesn't feel like a real place necessarily because of some of the photography effects that they're using, like making people larger than life, makes them feel like they don't actually like physically belong in that space, so then it makes it more surreal in visual, and that communicates to the viewer that it's a comic book narrative. Okay, this one has a really lovely border that they put around it that looks very similar to her headband here, and it also visually kind of aligns with the typeface that they're using down at the bottom. So this communicates sort of an elegance. Their body positioning is indicating sort of a disconnect between them, I would say, because they're both looking in different directions and her back is faced towards him. So I imagine that when I go see this movie that's going to be one of the subjects of this. It also feels like a romance though, right? Because they're dressed really nicely. It's a man and a woman, which typically will signify in a movie some sort of love connection if it's just the two of them. If there's more people, then that would signify something different, or like an action movie or something like that, typically, right? The thing about that reminds me, so the thing about aligning a movie to a particular existing genre and visuals that are associated with that genre is that there's also no reason that you can't kind of push the signifiers in a meaningful way, right? Like if you wanted to create a same-sex love story film, right, you could still use some of these similar body positionings and then still have members of the same sex that are existing in those body positions in order to communicate like this is a love story between two people of the same gender, right? And so so that's something that can be done as well, using like kind of pushing the envelope in one direction, but then you want to still follow some of the pre-existing notions about like what a love story looks like in a movie poster, for example. Like I don't have the poster for Brokeback Mountain, but I imagine that it has a similar feel to this. It's just the only difference is that it's two men, right? And so then it communicates that through that as well. That's something that I won't get to talk with you about in person, which is unfortunate because we talk about that in terms of the semiotics book, particularly in terms of maybe even like, so there's a lot of gender and racial stereotyping that is happening in movie posters, right? And so that's something, again, that you can push the envelope on in order to create visuals that are maybe not as offensive to women or people of color through using like not using stereotypes that have been popular in visual culture. So that's a whole nother topic though. I would love to talk to you more about this in person, but I did want to mention that as something that we do tend to talk about in this class. That's harder to communicate through the online version. But as you're reading the book, the semiotics book, that's something important to think about in terms of how those types of topics are getting addressed. and I think the book does a nice job of using examples of from all different standpoints. So maybe that'll help fill in the gaps a little bit, but just know that you are missing out on that a little bit, because that's something that works better in more of a conversation format as opposed to me talking at you through a video. So just a little side note. All right, so we have a couple other romance movies here. Dirty Dancing. One of the things that's happening in this was like pre-fancy Photoshop, so they were able to create a nice drop shadow, which visually related to the drop shadow that's happening in the main title here. So that's a visual effect that's getting used. This one has a really nice collaging element to it. When I talk more specifically about the project and what you're going to be required to do, this might be a good example to look at in terms of using multiple visuals in order to create a collaged poster, or a poster that is original to you, because you are allowed to use found images for this, but you do have to collage them together so that they create something that has not been created before using those visuals. This one is the Silence of the Lambs poster. It's very minimal and very elegant and super creepy, right? And it's trying to communicate that this movie is going to be very creepy. One thing that's really interesting about this poster, in terms of the art context, is this little skull is actually created out of human bodies, and that is pulled directly from a Salvador Dali painting. So a lot of times designers are very well versed in art history and the history of visual culture in an art historical sense. So art history, very important for designers, right? The other thing that they do, which is like a little bit, also signifies a little bit of a creepy vibe, is the lowercase lettering that's happening here. Just because we don't normally see titles in lowercase, so then that also is a little bit jarring, and so it can also further emphasize the kind of creepy nature of this film, right? Here's a sci-fi poster, more from the 80s. So it uses sort of, and I can tell that because of the color scheme. It's not necessarily trying to be 80s, it just is, because there's certain visuals that are associated with specific time periods because of the technology, for one thing. So having access, like printers tended to print in this way, so that's why they kind of use this color palette. This one's a great example because it's a visual spoof. It's taking this idea of family photograph and then kind of hamming it up and making it feel really funny and goofy. We also have sort of an association with the two actors that are depicted here as being comedic actors. So we're already kind of primed to think of this as funny even before we think about what the visuals are that they're used. So if you want to do that, like use a particular actor because you want a certain style of film because they've already been typecast in a particular role, that's something that you could do as well. So that's kind of what's creating the visual interest in here, is the referencing of family portraiture in a kind of funny way. This is a poster for Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. It's kind of melting and dripping in order to communicate to you drug use, prolific drug use, as the case may be with this film. And you can kind of, even the font is kind of matching that sort of like being pulled and pushed and sort of like mentally unhinged as well. And so the whole poster has that sort of feel to it. And these are sort of, if you wanted to do something like this in Photoshop, this would be something where you'd want to look into the filters and effects. I talk about them, I think, a little bit in the videos, but that again might be something that you could just real quick Google and see if you could find because again, that's not a terribly difficult effect to use, but it's just something I don't talk about in the videos. This movie poster is kind of fun. I like how the O is kind of dropping down below the line. These are the sort of subtleties that type layout really thrives on, is you just pull that O just down a little bit just to kind of call attention to like the going aspect of it, right? It feels like that O is going somewhere. And then the other fun thing that's happening in this image is it looks like they're doing a fist bump, but then it also looks like they're kind of holding the legs of the woman behind it because of where she's positioned. So she kind of pops forward to the foreground, even though she's technically in the background of this image. So there's some fun things that you can do with kind of playing with that concept. That's more of a photography concept, but it definitely is something that gets used in design. And then here's a poster for Moonrise Kingdom. So, and this is very typical of the shots, the visual shots. Wes Anderson is very interested in this sort of like straightforward, almost mugshot look to it, but in the way that he contextualizes it, it feels more like quirky as opposed to somebody getting arrested, right? It feels more like a quirky move that he's using here. In a way, he's also referencing like family portraits, but also trying to, like, nobody usually is smiling. They're usually just staring straight at the camera, which then creates these questions in the viewer as to what is their mental state then if they're not happy in this picture, right? What are they thinking about? What happened to them, right? And then he uses this really scripty font, this yellow over top of a blue sky background, which is very, it pops forward, right? And then you can see some of the yellow is then happening down here as well. So it is trying to tie in that color scheme. That's something that you want to do a lot of times with design, is try to visually tie in things that are happening up here with things that are happening down here. And they're doing that really effectively in this poster through the use of color scheme. Amelie. So these are more indie films, and they have some indie film feel to them because of some of the things that I've described already. Maybe even the facial expression in this sort of signifies playfulness. And she has this more kind of dramatic, trendy haircut with the bangs, which is funny because it's still, this is an older movie now, but it's still, that bangs are still sort of an alternative-y, trendy thing. So that's still happening. And then it has this contrasting color scheme, so her lips really pop forward and her eyes. It's also using some sort of like, it's making more subtle the tones of her skin so that it doesn't, it feels more flat, like a kind of like a pop art painting, maybe like a Andy Warhol. And then Big Fish is another more indie film. I love what they're doing with typeface in this movie poster. So having this kind of, these like swirly trees kind of grow up out of the lettering. They're actually making the letters exist in that space by putting a shadow on them, and making them feel like they're an object in the space as opposed to just typeface that has been applied over the surface of the poster. And then here are a couple of student examples. So this student was going for more of like an indie film kind of look. And this one, she actually made this hair piece and then put it on a friend of hers and then photographed it. I think she found the chalkboard, which then she found an image of a chalkboard and then put that behind it in order to get that look. Although she could have just also drawn on a chalkboard and put it behind there. And then sort of has this more like playful font that looks like flowers growing up into letters. This is another student example of a photography-based project. So there's two versions of this project that you can do. One is to kind of set up a whole photograph like this. I would advise only doing this if you've had some type of photography experience, because what I am looking for in this is good lighting, which I don't talk about in the class, as well as kind of visually organizing the space and having a lot of objects in there. So this, she's wearing glasses, she's got this camera on top of her head, like all of these items were visually designed and placed into this scene in order to create this this poster. So it's not like, oh, just go out and take a picture of your friend and then put some letters on it. That's not going to cut it for the project. What I'm looking for is actually like placing, like you actually organized sort of a still life scene, and that's where the design comes in, right? So that one is more challenging, but if you've taken some photography and you're kind of comfortable with physically organizing objects, then you could take that version of the project. But otherwise, you'll be doing the more collaged type version where you find photographs. You're also welcome to take your own photographs. Like if you need a picture of a mug or something and you want to just take a picture of a mug and then collage that in. But what I'm looking for in these is the photograph to have 4 different distinct images so that it then becomes your own creative work. And this one, I would say only has 3. So I'm pretty sure he got marked down for only having 3, because it was these O's, then this smoke, and then the I. So that's only 3. So you want to make sure that you have 4. Okay, so here's the project description. So you're going to invent a movie and then create a poster for it. The poster will be your creative work, which I've alluded to a little bit throughout this lecture, but I just want to re-emphasize that here. So what that means is that you either took a photograph specifically for the project and organized the space, or you digitally organized things by collaging 4 different images together. So it has to have 4 or more images that you have taken. There are some other good examples in the O2 project folder that you can look at. There's a folder called Student Examples, and you can kind of click through a few of those and see. Those are high quality examples that I've placed into that folder. You'll be using Photoshop to create the poster, and the poster needs to be able to be printed off 11 by 17. So I know I talk about this in the video, but I'm going to talk about it again here right now for a second. Is image size is very, very important. You cannot use small pixeled images on your posters because they will not be able to be viewed as a document that is 11 by 17. I know we're not printing them, but you'll still be able to, like, I'll be able to click on it and I'll still be able to tell that it's pixelated. So you never want to scale up anything in Photoshop. When you pull it in there, that's the only size that it can be, okay? If the image isn't big enough, you need to find one that's larger. So the pixel size, if you're using something for a background image, it needs to be at least 2000 pixels in both directions. If you're using it for some very small portion of your image, then it can probably be a little bit smaller. And that will just have to, once you already have your document created and you start pulling things in, you'll be able to see how big like a little flower or whatever could be when you pull it in. But again, never scale it up because it'll pixelate, and you can make things smaller, but you cannot make things larger in Photoshop. So don't, when I show you the transform tool, never make it larger, okay? And if it's gonna be your background, it needs to be at least 2000 pixels in both directions, probably 3000 in one direction and 2000 in the other direction. And there's a little video on how to use Google Images. It's a little dated, unfortunately, because Google has changed a little bit of their image searching policy. So just know that you can't actually click show image. You actually have to go to the website where the image is now and find that image and then download it, which is a total pain. And it was, it was very frustrating for people who use that for art purposes because it made it more difficult. So, but just know, I do show you also on the video on how to download Google to download images from Google. You can do a size image search on Google, so you're only seeing images that are large enough to use for the project. So anyways, that's what that last one is about, is making sure that your image size is large enough. Those are the main stipulations for the project. I'm gonna want a JPEG version of the project as well as a Photoshop version of the project. I wanna see that you used Photoshop to create these. Part of the class is being able to use these programs effectively, and I'm gonna need to have a Photoshop version of your project as well. So I'll have a folder in the finals folder, one for JPEG and one for Photoshop, and there should be one thing in each in order to get credit for the assignment. So again, if you have any questions about the assignment, you can email me and I can answer those. If I think they're questions that everyone would benefit from seeing the answers, I will answer them in a mass email and not just an email individually to you, because other people might be wondering the same thing. All right, good luck on your projects.